When the nurse whispered her daughter's real last name, Elena froze, because the only man who would recognize it ruled the city. And she had spent 5 years making sure he never found them. Where are you listening from today? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic Mafia romance stories. The name on her mailbox read, Hayes. It had taken 3 forms, 2 court appointments, and a shaking signature to make it official. Black ink on cream paper. A judge who didn't ask unnecessary questions. A clerk who stamped the approval without looking twice at her face. Elena Hayes. She had practiced saying it in the mirror the first week after the change. Softly at first, then with confidence, then casually, like it had always belonged to her. Hi, I'm Elena Hayes. It sounded safe. It sounded forgettable. That was the point. 5 years earlier, her name had carried weight in certain rooms. It had opened doors she didn't want opened. It had been whispered alongside another name, one spoken with respect, fear, and careful distance. Elena Rossi. Rossi was the problem. Rossi was traceable. Rossi had history stitched into it like a family crest carved into stone. Rossi had once stood beside Dante Moretti in photographs she made sure no longer existed. Hayes was clean. Hayes lived in a small townhouse on a quiet street where the loudest sound at night was a neighbor's dog scratching at the door. Hayes volunteered at school bake sales and paid bills online and folded laundry while cartoons hummed in the background. Hayes was invisible. And invisibility was survival. Sophia's laughter floated from the living room, high and bright, shattering the quiet of Elena's thoughts. 6 years old and already too observant for her own good. She was sprawled across the rug with crayons scattered around her like fallen confetti, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. Elena leaned against the kitchen counter and watched her. The girl had Elena's dark hair, though lighter at the ends from summer sun. But the eyes, those eyes were not hers. Steel gray. Steady. Assessing. Even at 6, Sophia didn't just look at the world. She studied it. Elena felt the old ache bloom in her chest, the one she carried like a bruise that never fully healed. She had told herself for years that distance would blur resemblance, that nurture would outweigh nature, that time would soften the sharp edges of bloodlines. She had been wrong. Sophia shifted, pushing her hair behind her ear in a gesture so achingly familiar that Elena had to look away. That wasn't from her. That was from him. Dante Moretti. She hadn't said his name out loud in 5 years. Not when Sophia asked why other kids had fathers at school events. Not when a stranger with dark hair walked too close on the sidewalk. Not even on nights when memory crept in uninvited and refused to leave. Dante had been power-wrapped in quiet control. He never raised his voice because he never needed to. Rooms adjusted when he entered them. People straightened unconsciously. The world made space. He had loved her the same way he did everything else, fully, intensely, without half measures. And that had been the problem. Loving him meant inheriting his enemies. Loving him meant learning that protection and danger sometimes wore the same suit. Loving him meant understanding that a child would not be seen as innocence. A child would be leverage. Elena had learned that the night she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. A quiet warning disguised as loyalty. A suggestion that heirs made empires vulnerable. She had left before dawn. No screaming, no confrontation. Just a suitcase, a plane ticket, and silence so complete it felt violent. She had changed cities, changed her number, changed her name. She had erased Rossi, but blood did not erase so easily. Mama? Sophia's voice pulled her back. Yes, baby? Why don't we have pictures of when I was a baby? Elena's breath stalled for half a second. We do, she said carefully. They're just packed away. Why? Because some faces couldn't be in the same frame as you without unraveling everything. Because we moved a lot, she said instead. Sophia considered this, nodding slowly as if filing the answer away for later analysis. She didn't press. She rarely did. That, too, was not from Elena. There were moments, quiet, unguarded moments, when Elena wondered if he felt it. That strange, invisible tether that sometimes pulled at her ribs without warning. If somewhere in the city he ruled with clean hands and invisible lines, Dante Moretti ever paused and sensed something missing. She doubted it. Men like him buried absence under work, under strategy, under control. She had given him nothing to find. No birth certificate with his name, no hospital record tied to Moretti, no photographs posted online, no trace. Sophia Hayes was born in a different city, under a different surname. Elena had believed that was enough. She moved toward the living room and crouched beside her daughter, brushing a thumb along her cheek. "You're very quiet," she murmured. "I'm thinking," Sophia replied seriously. "About what?" The girl held up her drawing. 3 stick figures stood beneath a crooked sun. One tall, one smaller, one somewhere between. "About who the third one is," Sophia said. Elena's chest tightened painfully. "Maybe it's just us and someone we haven't met yet," she said gently. Sophia tilted her head, gray eyes thoughtful. "Maybe," she agreed. Elena kissed her forehead and stood, forcing calm into her breathing. Hayes. That was who she was now. Not Rossi. Not Moretti. Just a single mother with a quiet life, and a carefully constructed wall between her daughter and a man powerful enough to tear the city apart. She had buried the name. She had buried the past. And she believed, truly believed, that what was buried stayed that way. She didn't know yet that it only took one whispered surname in the wrong hallway to bring everything back to life. It started with a sound Elena had never heard before. Not a scream, not a cry. A sharp, strangled inhale from the living room, followed by the dull thud of something small hitting hardwood. She dropped the glass in her hand without realizing she'd let go. It shattered in the sink as she ran. "Sophia?" Her daughter was curled on her side near the coffee table, tiny fingers digging into her stomach, knees drawn up tight against her chest. Her face had gone pale, too pale, and a thin sheen of sweat clung to her temples. "Mama!" Sophia gasped, voice shaking. "It hurts!" The world narrowed instantly. "Where, baby?" Elena asked, already kneeling, already sliding her arms around her. Sophia pointed weakly to the lower right side of her abdomen. Her breath came shallow and uneven. Elena pressed her palm there gently. Sophia cried out. That was all she needed. "Okay," Elena whispered, forcing calm into her voice, even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "Okay, we're going to the hospital." She didn't grab a bag, didn't lock every window like she usually did. She scooped her daughter up, feeling how light she was, too light, and carried her to the car. Every second felt like an accusation. "Why didn't you see this sooner? Why didn't you notice?" Sophia whimpered as Elena buckled her in, hands trembling as she fastened the strap. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "You hear me? I'm right here." The drive blurred into red lights and 2 slow drivers and the hollow roar of blood in her ears. She didn't remember parking, didn't remember slamming the door. She only remembered running through sliding glass doors that parted like permission she didn't have time to request. St. Gabriel Medical Center, bright, sterile, public, too public. "I need help," she called, breathless. "My daughter, she's in pain. Severe pain." A nurse moved quickly, efficient and focused, guiding Sophia into a wheelchair. Questions came fast. "How old is she?" 6. "Any known allergies?" "No." "Pain scale?" 10, Sophia whimpered. They moved down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and something metallic underneath. Elena stayed close enough to feel the heat radiating from her daughter's skin. They stopped at triage. A clipboard appeared, and with it, the first crack in her composure. Mother's name? The nurse asked. Elena Hayes. The name came easily now. It always did. And the child? Sophia Hayes? The nurse nodded, scribbling. Date of birth? Elena answered automatically. The nurse paused. Place of birth? Elena's throat tightened. Riverside Women's Clinic, she said, choosing the rehearsed lie she had memorized years ago. The nurse typed something into the system. The computer screen reflected faintly in her glasses. Has she ever been treated at St. Gabriel before? No. Another pause. Any previous surnames? The question was routine, neutral, asked without suspicion. It still felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. Her pulse roared. No, she said evenly. The nurse nodded again, satisfied. For now. A doctor appeared, young and alert, pressing gently along Sophia's abdomen. Sophia cried out again, curling inward. We're looking at possible appendicitis, he said quickly. We'll need imaging. If it's rupturing, we go to surgery immediately. Surgery, the word hollowed her out. Do whatever you need, Elena said, voice steady by sheer force. They wheeled Sophia away, and just like that, Elena was alone in the harsh white light of the waiting area. She sank into a plastic chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Appendicitis was common, treatable, ordinary. Ordinary was safe. She repeated it silently. Ordinary is safe. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it. Another buzz. And another. Unknown number. Her chest tightened instinctively. She turned the phone face down without looking. Not now. Please, not now. A nurse returned with more paperwork. Consent forms, she said gently. We may need to operate quickly. Elena took the pen. Her hand hesitated over the signature line. Elena Hayes. She signed it, clean, legible, legal. But as she handed it back, the nurse frowned slightly at the screen again. There's something odd, she murmured almost to herself. Elena's spine stiffened. What? She asked too quickly. The nurse clicked through tabs. It's probably nothing. Our system flagged a similar birth date under a different registry. Elena felt her heart stop. What registry? She asked quietly. The nurse squinted at the monitor. It's archived. Probably a duplicate entry from a transfer hospital. Let me double check. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Time slowed. Elena's palms went cold. Please. Please let it be nothing. The nurse leaned closer to the screen. Huh? She murmured softly. That's strange. Elena couldn't breathe. What? She asked again. The nurse shook her head, distracted. It's just pulling an older file. Different surname. The air left Elena's lungs in a silent rush. What surname? She forced out. The nurse didn't seem to realize the weight of what she was about to say. Rossi, she read absently. Sophia. Rossi. The name echoed, not loudly, but with impact. Elena's vision tunneled. That must be an error, she said quickly. That's not us. The nurse nodded vaguely. Probably just a glitch. I'll flag it. But as she turned the monitor slightly, Elena caught a glimpse of something else. A note in the system. Cross-referenced foundation records. Security protocol. Notify. The nurse didn't seem to register it. Elena did. Her stomach dropped. St. Gabriel wasn't just a hospital. It was partially funded by the Moretti Foundation. She had known that once. She had chosen to forget. And somewhere, in a quiet office far above the emergency department, a notification was about to appear. Original surname detected. Rossi. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. Appendicitis. Ordinary. Safe. Except nothing tied to that surname had ever been either. Down the corridor, double doors swung open as they wheeled Sophia toward imaging. Elena rose to follow, and she had the sudden, sickening certainty that the surgery wasn't the only thing about to begin. The hallway outside radiology felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Elena noticed it immediately, the way the air hummed a little sharper, the way sound carried differently against tile and steel. Sophia had been wheeled through double doors 20 minutes earlier, small fingers clutching the edge of the blanket until the last second. "I'll be right here," Elena had promised. Now she stood with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, staring at a poster about pediatric pain management without actually seeing it. Appendicitis, routine, common, safe. The word safe no longer felt trustworthy. At the nurse's station across from her, 2 women leaned toward a computer screen. One of them, the same triage nurse, clicked through digital files, brows drawn together in mild confusion. "It's probably just a system merge," the younger nurse said lightly. "We switched databases 3 years ago." "Still," the older one murmured, scrolling, "it shouldn't cross-reference like this." Elena tried not to listen. She failed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A gurney rolled past behind her. Somewhere, a child laughed in a distant room. Life moved forward without noticing the cliff she felt herself standing on. The older nurse leaned closer to the monitor. "Date of birth matches," she muttered. "Same timestamp, same attending physician." The younger nurse frowned. "Different last name, though?" "Yeah." Elena's pulse began to pound in her ears. "Rossi," the older nurse read quietly. The name hit the air like a dropped glass. Elena's fingers dug into her own arms. The younger nurse blinked. "Rossi?" "Yeah." A pause, then softer. "That's a Moretti name." The words weren't loud. They didn't echo. But they carried. Elena felt the world tilt. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Moretti. The name existed in this city the way certain landmarks did. Impossible to ignore, impossible to disassociate. The Moretti Foundation funded half the pediatric wing. The Moretti name was engraved on plaques, embossed on donor walls, printed in annual gala programs. It was a name spoken carefully. The younger nurse gave a nervous half-laugh. "You think it's related to them?" The older nurse shrugged. "Could be coincidence, could be old family line, but it's not common." Elena forced her feet to move. She stepped toward the desk, every muscle in her body controlled by sheer will. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice even. Both nurses looked up, momentarily startled. No, the younger one said quickly. "Just system cleanup." Elena offered a tight smile. "I told you, it must be an error." The older nurse nodded, though her eyes flicked once more to the screen. "It happens." But her hand hovered over the keyboard. On the monitor, Elena caught a glimpse of something small, but devastating. A notification icon. Cross-reference alert. Archived birth registry. And beneath it, Foundation-linked file access. The older nurse clicked. "I'll just flag it so billing doesn't get confused," she said absently. Billing. Elena's stomach turned. This wasn't about billing. In a quiet office 3 floors above them, security feeds ran continuously. Foundation-endowed patient alerts were automated. Cross-referenced names triggered internal notifications, not for curiosity, but for discretion. She knew that. She had once stood beside the man who insisted on it. Dante Moretti had funded St. Gabriel's pediatric surgical wing after a child from one of his neighborhoods died waiting for care. He had stood at the ribbon cutting in a dark suit, expression unreadable, and told the press that no child in his city would ever be turned away again. He had meant it. He had also installed oversight. Elena's throat tightened. The older nurse leaned back in her chair. "It's odd, though," she said quietly. "The archived record shows discharge under Rossi. And then 6 months later, a legal amendment." The younger nurse tilted her head. "Name change?" "Looks like it." Elena felt the floor shift beneath her. "Anyway," the younger nurse said lightly, "not our business." The older nurse nodded, but she didn't close the file. And somewhere, silently, automatically, The system did what it was designed to do. It logged access. It logged the surname. It logged the Foundation cross-reference. And it sent a notification. Elena felt it before anything visibly changed. A subtle shift in the air. The older nurse's screen flickered briefly as an incoming authorization request appeared. "Strange," the nurse murmured. "What?" the younger one asked. "Security clearance just pinged this file." Elena's blood ran cold. "For a pediatric appendectomy?" The younger nurse laughed softly. "That's excessive." The older nurse hesitated. "It's tagged Foundation priority." Foundation. Priority. Elena's breathing went shallow. She stepped back slowly, as if distance could undo what had already begun. Down the hallway, an elevator dinged. Not loudly, but distinctly. Footsteps followed. Measured. Controlled. Not hurried. Not chaotic. Purposeful? The nurses straightened unconsciously. Elena didn't turn. She didn't need to. The whisper in the hallway had already done its damage. Rossi, that's a Moretti name. And somewhere above them, a system built for protection had just informed the most powerful man in the city that a child carrying his blood had entered his hospital under a different name. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Appendicitis was no longer the only thing she was afraid of, because the surname she had buried had just been spoken out loud. And names, once spoken in the right corridors, traveled fast. It happened gradually. Not with sirens, not with shouting, with silence. Elena felt it first in the elevator. She had stepped inside alone after being told Sophia was being prepped for imaging on the 3rd floor. The doors slid shut with their usual soft hiss. The overhead light flickered faintly as the elevator began its ascent. Then it stopped. Not between floors, not with an alarm. It simply paused. The digital panel blinked once, then reset. Floor access restricted. Her pulse ticked upward. A moment later, the elevator resumed, smoother than before. When the doors opened, 2 men stood waiting in the hallway. Not hospital staff, not patients. Dark suits, earpieces barely visible, posture too straight to be accidental. They didn't look at her. They didn't have to. She stepped out slowly, her shoes too loud against the polished floor. Down the corridor, the nurses' station looked the same. Computers hummed. Phones rang. But there was a difference now, a subtle tightening, like a string pulled too taut. The older nurse from earlier stood straighter behind her desk, her expression carefully neutral. A security officer she hadn't seen before leaned casually against the wall near the double doors leading to surgery. His badge read St. Gabriel Security, but his eyes were alert in a way that suggested something more layered beneath the uniform. Elena's stomach turned. She didn't know exactly what had been triggered, but she knew who it had reached. The air felt heavier. Hospitals were supposed to buzz with chaos, rolling beds, rushing nurses, urgent announcements crackling over intercoms. This felt different. Controlled. Measured. Like a room preparing itself. A nurse passed her briskly, whispering into her phone. "Yes, upstairs. Foundation protocol." Foundation protocol. The words scraped against her nerves. Elena stepped closer to the surgery doors, pressing her palm flat against the cool metal as if she could feel Sophia on the other side. "It's routine," she whispered to herself. "It's just routine." But routine didn't lock down elevators. Routine didn't bring in men who stood like barriers instead of staff. At the far end of the corridor, a glass office door closed quietly. Inside, a man in a gray suit lifted a phone to his ear. His tone was low, respectful. "Yes, sir. The file was flagged under archived registry. Cross-reference confirmed." A pause. "Yes." Another pause. "No, she's still here." Elena's breath caught. The kind of stillness that follows power isn't loud. It isn't chaotic. It's anticipatory. It's the air before a storm breaks. The security officer near the surgery doors adjusted his stance slightly as another suited man stepped off the elevator behind her. This one wore no visible badge at all. He spoke softly to the officer. A nod was exchanged. No panic. No announcement. Just confirmation. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't need to see him yet. She felt him approaching long before he would physically enter the building. It was a sensation she had never been able to explain properly. The way presence traveled ahead of him. The way rooms shifted even before doors opened. She closed her eyes briefly. Not here. Please, not here. A nurse approached her, voice gentle but professional. Ms. Hayes? Your daughter will be taken into surgery shortly. Can I see her? Elena asked. I'm afraid not just yet. The nurse hesitated, glancing past her down the corridor. Is something wrong? Elena asked quietly. No, the nurse said quickly. Everything is under control. Under control. The phrase landed differently now. Another elevator dinged. This time, when the doors opened, no one stepped out immediately. Instead, two of the suited men straightened. Elena didn't turn. She didn't want to give the moment acknowledgement. Footsteps echoed softly against tile. Measured, unhurried, deliberate. Each step controlled the space around it. The hallway didn't grow louder. It grew quieter. Phones stopped ringing. Conversations dimmed. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to fade beneath the weight of awareness. Some of the nurses glanced up instinctively, their expressions shifting into something between recognition and deference. Elena felt the back of her neck prickle. She knew that silence. It wasn't fear. It was respect. And respect, in certain circles, was far more dangerous. A private call had been placed upstairs. Permissions had been granted. Access had been authorized. And the most powerful man in the city had been informed that a child bearing a buried surname was under his roof. Elena's pulse thundered. She had always believed hospitals were neutral ground. White walls, clean floors, rules. But St. Gabriel wasn't just a hospital. It was endowed, named, protected. And that protection did not belong to the public alone. She exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax. If she panicked, she lost control. If she ran, she confirmed everything. She stayed still. The footsteps stopped somewhere behind her, not close enough to touch, close enough to claim. The atmosphere had changed. Elevators paused, security doubled. Phones rang upstairs, and Elena stood outside the surgery doors, staring at her own reflection in the polished metal, knowing with sick certainty that appendicitis was no longer the only operation about to take place. Because when power arrives, it doesn't knock. It settles. And the air waits for it to speak. The corridor didn't react loudly when he arrived. It adjusted. Elena felt it before she saw him, the way the air seemed to steady itself, like a room bracing without knowing why. The two suited men near the elevator shifted their weight almost imperceptibly. The security officer straightened. A nurse mid-sentence lowered her voice. Then the elevator doors opened. Dante Moretti stepped out as if the hospital had been built with his stride in mind. Dark suit, immaculate, not a crease out of place. No rush in his movements, no visible anger. Just quiet authority that didn't demand space because it had never been denied it. He didn't look around first. He looked at her. 5 years dissolved in a single, measured glance. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The fluorescent lights reflected faintly off the polished floor, off the glass panels along the corridor, off the silver in his tie clip. He looked older, not in weakness, but in refinement. Sharper at the edges, more controlled. His eyes were the same, steel gray, unforgiving when necessary, unreadable when he chose, and right now, fixed entirely on her. There was no shock on his face, no accusation, just recognition so complete it felt intimate. Elena, he said. Her name in his voice felt like a door unlocking. She hadn't heard it spoken like that in years, Not clipped, not cautious, not haze. Just Elena. She forced her spine straight. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. He inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth in that without accepting it. "I own half the pediatric wing," he replied calmly. "I go where I'm needed." His tone wasn't arrogance, it was fact. Behind him, one of the suited men stepped back, creating more space in the corridor. Nurses pretended to focus on charts. A doctor passing by slowed for half a second before continuing. The hospital hadn't stopped functioning. It had simply recalibrated. Dante took one step closer, not invading her space, but narrowing the distance enough that she felt it in her chest. "You look tired," he observed softly. "My daughter is in surgery," she said. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I know." Of course he did. Elena swallowed. "You shouldn't have been notified." He held her gaze for a long moment. "The system flagged a name," he said evenly. "Rossi." The surname hung between them like something alive. "You buried it," he continued. "Not well enough." Her fingers curled into her palms. "She's my daughter," she said firmly. "Not a database alert." His eyes flickered then, not with anger, but with something deeper, something restrained. "I'm aware." The surgery doors swung open behind her with a quiet, mechanical sound. Elena turned instinctively. A gurney rolled out briefly before being redirected to another corridor. For a fraction of a second, she saw a small hand resting against white sheets. Pale fingers. An IV taped carefully to soft skin. Dante saw it too. His gaze shifted past Elena's shoulder. And stopped. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't move toward the gurney. Didn't call out. Didn't demand anything. He simply looked. The world narrowed to that point. Steel gray eyes meeting the fragile outline of a child beneath hospital lights. His breath changed, just slightly, enough that Elena noticed. Sophia's head turned weakly on the pillow as a nurse adjusted her blanket. Her hair spilled across the fabric in dark waves. Even under sedation, her expression held that familiar stillness. Dante's face didn't soften. It sharpened. Recognition didn't crash into him like a wave. It settled, precise, measured. His gaze traced the angle of her cheek, the shape of her jaw, the line of her brow. Then he looked back at Elena. "How old?" he asked. The question was quiet. It still felt like a verdict. 6, she said. He did the math instantly. She saw it happen. 6 years, 5 years gone, 1 year before she disappeared. His composure didn't fracture, but something beneath it did. "She was born during a storm," he said almost to himself. Elena's pulse stuttered. "You had no right to know that," she whispered. "I know everything that crosses my Foundation's network," he replied calmly, "especially when it carries my blood." The word landed heavy. Blood. The suited men remained at a distance. No one interrupted. The hallway existed around them but did not intrude. "You don't get to claim that," Elena said, voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "You weren't there." His gaze didn't waver. "I know," he said quietly. Not defensive, not dismissive. Just true. The surgery doors closed again with a soft click. Silence pressed in. Dante stepped slightly to the side, giving her a clear view of the corridor to the operating wing. He didn't block her. Didn't corner her. He stood beside her, looking through the same doors. "I won't cause a scene," he said. "Not here." "You already have," she replied. His lips curved faintly. Not amusement. Something closer to regret. "Elena," he said softly, "I didn't walk in here to fight you." "Then why did you?" His eyes drifted once more toward the closed doors. "Because if that child is mine," he said carefully, "then she is not alone in this building." The statement wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Elena felt the weight of it settle into her bones. 5 years of silence. 5 years of hiding. And now Dante Moretti stood in a hospital corridor like time had never passed. Calm, flawless, devastatingly present. And for the first time since she signed her new name in court, Elena understood something with terrifying clarity. She hadn't erased him. She had delayed him. And he had just walked back into her life like he owned it. The hallway felt too narrow for the weight of what stood between them. Machines hummed in distant rooms. Shoes squeaked softly against polished tile. A nurse laughed somewhere near the nurses' station, the sound fragile and out of place. Dante didn't raise his voice. He didn't step into her space. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, gaze steady enough to feel like gravity. How old is she, Elena? He had already asked once, but this time the question settled deeper. Not casual, not curious, precise. Elena swallowed. 6, she said again, her voice steadier now because it had to be. 6. The word hovered in the sterile air. He didn't react dramatically. No sharp inhale, no visible anger. He did the math. She saw it happen in the slight narrowing of his eyes, in the faint tightening of his jaw. 6 years. 5 years since she disappeared before sunrise with no note. 5 years since he'd woken to a house that felt too quiet. 6 years since the night the storm knocked power out across half the city. The night she had left him standing at the window with a question he never got to finish asking. You were already gone when she was born, he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was reconstruction. Elena's fingers curled into the sleeve of her coat. Yes. Another beat of silence. You knew, he continued, his tone controlled, thoughtful rather than furious. Before you left. She closed her eyes for half a second. Yes. He nodded once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. There was no explosion, no raised voice. That was what made it worse. I would have protected you, he said. The statement wasn't defensive. It was certain. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. The sharp lines of his face. The restraint carved into his posture. The control he wore like armor. That was the problem, she whispered. His gaze sharpened slightly. Explain. You protect what you claim, she said, and you destroy what threatens it. A flicker passed through his eyes. Not denial. Recognition. And you thought she would be leverage, he said. I knew she would, Elena replied. I heard them. The hallway seemed to tighten. Who? He asked. The word was low. Dangerously so. She shook her head. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. She stepped back slightly, lowering her voice. The night before I left, I overheard a conversation. Your name. Mine. The word heir. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did. You were never supposed to hear that, he said. I was never supposed to exist in that conversation, she replied. Silence pressed in between them. On the other side of the surgery doors, metal instruments clinked faintly. A monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Life continued. You should have told me, he said at last. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't sharp. It was quiet enough to hurt. You think I didn't want to? She shot back softly. You think I didn't stand in that hallway and almost turn around? His gaze locked onto hers. You don't walk away from me easily. I did, she said. Yes, he replied. You did. And somehow that acknowledgement carried more weight than anger would have. He looked down the corridor briefly, collecting his thoughts. When he looked back at her, the storm she had expected wasn't there. Just calculation. She was born in the middle of a blackout, he said slowly. City power grid failed. 3 hospitals switched to backup generators. Elena felt her heart slam. You read the reports, she said. I read everything, he answered. His voice wasn't prideful. It was simple truth. You didn't put my name anywhere, he continued. Not on the birth certificate, not on the registry. You erased me. I protected her, Elena said fiercely. He studied her face for a long moment. And yourself? He asked. Her breath caught. That stopped mattering, she said. Something shifted in his expression then. Not anger, not hurt. Understanding. He stepped slightly closer, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that his voice dropped lower. You were afraid of my world, he said. Yes. You were afraid of me. She hesitated. No, she said finally. I was afraid of what loving you would cost her. The words hung heavy. Dante exhaled slowly. 6 years, he murmured. He looked past her shoulder again, toward the operating wing. She has my eyes, he said. Elena's chest tightened painfully. Yes. And my timing, he added quietly. She didn't look away. A faint, almost imperceptible softness entered his voice. She's not afraid of you, Elena said. His gaze returned to her. I would never make her afraid. No, she agreed. You wouldn't. Another silence, not empty, full. The timeline lay between them now, like a solved equation. 6 years, 5 years gone. 1 year of secrets before dawn. He didn't accuse her. He didn't demand DNA tests or legal claims. He asked only one more question. Does she know? He said. Elena shook her head. No. He nodded once. Then we do this carefully. She blinked. We? Yes, he said calmly. The word settled into her bones like inevitability. I won't shout, he added softly. I won't force anything in a hospital hallway. His gaze flicked once more to the surgery doors. But understand this, Elena. His voice lowered further, steady and unyielding. 6 years doesn't erase blood. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The math had spoken, and neither of them could pretend it hadn't. The double doors to pre-op swung open faster than Elena expected. A nurse stepped out first, her expression composed but tight around the edges. Behind her, a doctor in pale blue scrubs removed his gloves as he approached, gaze scanning the hallway until it landed on Elena, and then flicked, almost involuntarily, to Dante. Elena Hayes? The doctor asked. Yes, she said immediately, stepping forward. There's been a development, he began. The word landed wrong. Development meant change. Change meant complication. We were preparing Sophia for surgery when her blood work came back, he continued. Her white count is elevated, consistent with appendicitis, but there's something else. Elena's heart stuttered. What? Something else? The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She has an irregular clotting response. It's not common, but it's not unheard of either. Under normal circumstances, we'd manage it with transfusion support. Then do that, Elena said quickly. Whatever you need. The doctor's gaze shifted briefly to Dante again, then back to her. It's not that simple, he said. Her blood markers are unusual. We ran the panel twice. A nurse behind him nodded. The match requirement is highly specific. Elena's fingers went cold. What does that mean? She whispered. It means, the doctor said carefully, that if we encounter excessive bleeding during surgery, we will need a direct familial donor. Immediately. The word familial rang louder than anything else. Elena's breath caught in her throat. We have blood in the bank, she said. Use that. We will, the doctor assured her, but if the reaction escalates, the safest option is a close genetic match. Parent, sibling. Silence expanded. The probability settled into the space between the three of them. Parent. Elena felt Dante's presence at her side without looking at him. We need to know, the doctor continued gently, if there is a biological father available. The question was clinical. neutral. It still felt like a blade. Elena's voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. Why does it have to be him? Because the clotting irregularity appears hereditary, the doctor said. The protein markers are dominant. It doesn't present in every generation, but when it does, it's consistent. Her stomach dropped. Dominant. Consistent. Dante spoke for the first time since the doctor stepped into the hallway. What's her blood type? He asked calmly. Oh, negative, the doctor replied. Dante nodded once. So am I. Elena turned sharply to look at him. The doctor glanced between them. Mr. Moretti, he said carefully, if you are the biological father, the likelihood of compatibility is extremely high. The hallway felt too small. Elena's pulse roared in her ears. This is precautionary, the doctor added quickly. We're not saying there will be complications, but we need to prepare. Prepare, the word echoed. Dante's expression didn't change. Test me, he said. The certainty in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. You don't even know, she started. I know enough, he replied quietly. The doctor nodded. We'll run an expedited panel. It will take 15 minutes. A nurse stepped forward with a small tray. Elena watched as Dante rolled up his sleeve without hesitation. The movement was smooth, familiar, controlled. The needle slid into his vein. Dark red filled the vial quickly. Elena's gaze locked on the line of blood flowing through the tube. It was surreal. 5 years of hiding. 5 years of silence. And now the truth ran visibly between them in sterile hospital lighting. Dante didn't flinch. He watched the process with detached focus, as if this were a negotiation instead of a biological reckoning. The nurse labeled the sample. Moretti, Dante. No hesitation. No alias. No attempt to conceal. Elena felt something twist painfully inside her. She had erased his name from every document tied to Sophia. The hospital had just written it back. 15 minutes felt like an hour. Elena paced the hallway while Dante stood still, hands clasped loosely in front of him. You don't get to decide this alone, she said finally. He looked at her. I'm not deciding, he said calmly. I'm responding. To what? To my daughter needing me. The word daughter settled heavy and irreversible. The surgery doors remained closed. Machines hummed behind them. Life balanced on controlled precision. A nurse reappeared, holding a clipboard. She didn't need to speak immediately. Her expression said enough. It's a match, she said softly. The probability was clear. So was the truth. Elena closed her eyes. Of course it was. The doctor stepped forward again. We'll proceed with surgery. Mr. Moretti, we may need you on standby for transfusion. I'll be here, he replied. No bravado, no performance. Just presence. Elena felt the weight of inevitability settle into her bones. You understand, the doctor added gently, that this confirms paternity medically. Elena's breath caught. The nurse didn't look up from her chart. The suited men at the end of the hallway didn't react. But something invisible shifted. Confirmed. Not suspected. Not implied. Confirmed. Dante met her gaze again. There was no triumph in his eyes. No accusation. Only a quiet, devastating certainty. I told you, he said softly. 6 years doesn't erase blood. Behind the surgery doors, metal instruments clinked. A monitor beeped steadily, and Elena realized that whatever she had buried 5 years ago had just been unearthed under hospital lights, with science as witness. Appendicitis was no longer the only thing being operated on. The past was open now, and it wasn't bleeding quietly. The surgery doors had closed again, sealing Sophia behind layers of steel and protocol, and fluorescent light. Dante stood near the wall, jacket folded neatly over his arm now, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the small white bandage where blood had been drawn. He looked exactly as he always did in moments of crisis, still, Focused, contained. Elena hated that about him, not because it was cold, because it was powerful. Silence stretched between them, thick and unavoidable. The truth had been confirmed in a lab. Science had spoken without emotion, without hesitation. Now it was her turn. "You want to know why?" she said quietly. Dante didn't move. "Yes." He didn't demand it. He didn't soften it. He simply waited. Elena stared at the surgery doors, afraid that if she looked at him too long, she might remember what it felt like to trust him without calculating the risk. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after that dinner at your estate," she began. Her voice was steady at first, almost detached. The one where half the room was pretending to be loyal. His jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. "I wasn't going to tell you that night," she continued. "I wanted to wait. I wanted it to be ours. Not an announcement made in front of men who measure weakness for sport." She folded her arms across her chest, fingers pressing into her skin. "I stayed late after everyone left. You were in your office. I went looking for you." Her throat tightened. "And I heard them." Dante's eyes sharpened. "Heard who?" he asked quietly. "2 of your senior men," she replied. "One of them was someone you trusted. Someone who'd been at your side since before I met you." A shadow crossed his expression. "They were talking about succession," she said. "About optics. About stability. And?" His voice was dangerously calm now. "And about how a child complicates power," she whispered. "How heirs make leverage. How love makes men predictable." The hallway felt colder. "I stood outside the door and listened to them debate whether it would be cleaner if there wasn't one," she finished. Silence hit like a physical force. Dante didn't explode. He didn't shout. He inhaled once, slow and deliberate. "Names," he said. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." "It doesn't matter anymore," she insisted, "because I never gave them the chance." She finally looked at him. "They didn't know I was pregnant," she said, "but they were already preparing for it. Already calculating what your vulnerability would look like." His gaze didn't waver. "You think I would have allowed that?" he said. "I think you would have destroyed them," she replied. "Yes. And in doing that, you would have confirmed their worst fear," she said softly, "that a child makes you reckless." His jaw clenched. "I wasn't afraid of you," she continued. "I was afraid of what your enemies would do the moment they realized you cared about something more than control." Dante stepped closer, not threatening, intent. "You didn't trust me to protect you," he said. "I didn't trust your world to leave her alone," Elena shot back. The words echoed down the sterile corridor. "I had a choice," she said, voice shaking now. "Tell you, stay, and watch the knives come out. Or disappear before they had a name to sharpen them against." "And you chose disappearance?" "Yes." His expression hardened, not at her, but at something deeper. "You should have come to me," he said. "I almost did," she whispered. "I stood outside your office door with my hand on the handle. I was going to tell you." Her voice cracked. "But then I imagined our daughter growing up behind armed gates. I imagined her name in whispers. I imagined someone deciding she was useful." The word useful hung heavy in the air. "So I left before dawn," she finished, "before I could change my mind." Dante looked away for the first time. "And you thought I wouldn't look for you?" he asked. "I knew you would," she admitted. "That's why I didn't just leave you. I erased you." His eyes returned to hers, steel gray and unreadable. "You changed her surname," he said. "Yes." "You erased mine." "Yes." The admission didn't come with apology. It came with exhaustion. "I didn't do it to punish you," she said softly. "I did it because loving you was going to put a target on her back." He was quiet for a long moment. The distant beeping from inside the operating room filled the space between them. "You believed I would choose power over her," he said. "No," she replied. "I believed you would choose her over power." His breath stilled. "And that," she continued, "would make her the most dangerous thing in your life." The truth landed. Heavy. Irrefutable. Dante's voice lowered. "You decided for both of us." "Yes." "And you carried that alone." "Yes." The hallway seemed to hold its breath. "I don't forgive the men who said that," he said finally. "And I don't forgive myself for letting a culture exist where you believed it." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "That world is mine," he continued, "which means its failures are mine." For the first time since he arrived, she saw something unguarded flicker across his face. Regret. "I ran because I loved her," she said quietly. "And I would have stayed because I loved both of you," he replied. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't loud. They were simple and devastating. Behind the surgery doors, a nurse's voice called out an update. Instruments clinked softly. Life and blood and history converged in one sterile hallway. "I didn't trust you with the truth," Elena said. "No," Dante agreed. He stepped closer, not to corner her, but to stand beside her. "But I understand why," he added. She didn't expect that. She didn't expect understanding. And that, more than anger, made her chest ache. "I chose disappearance over trust," she whispered. Dante looked toward the surgery doors, then back at her. "And now," he said quietly, "you don't have that option anymore." He wasn't threatening her. He was stating a fact. The truth was no longer buried. It was breathing. And for the first time in 6 years, Elena realized something terrifying. She hadn't just run from danger. She had run from the possibility that he might have chosen them anyway. The consent form was placed in front of him without ceremony. White paper, black ink, clinical language that reduced bloodlines and buried years into sterile phrasing. Biological donor authorization. Dante didn't read it twice. He signed his name once, clean and deliberate. Dante Moretti. No hesitation, no alias, no distance. Elena watched his hand move across the paper, the final stroke of his signature steady and unmistakable. It felt like watching something irreversible happen in real time. A nurse guided him into a small transfusion room adjacent to the operating wing. It wasn't dramatic. No emergency rush, no chaos, just preparation. Controlled. Purposeful. "Have you donated before?" the nurse asked gently as she tied a band around his upper arm. "Yes," he replied. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Men like him donated in private, quietly, efficiently. The needle slid into his vein with practiced ease. Dark red began to move through the clear tubing. Elena felt her throat tighten. She had spent 6 years pretending that blood was just biology, that names were ink and documents were protection. Now blood was visible, real, undeniable. Dante didn't look away from it. He watched the line fill as if he were studying something sacred. Across the hall, through a narrow observation window, she could see Sophia's small body beneath surgical lights, pale against white sheets. A team of doctors moving in quiet coordination around her. A second IV line was prepared, waiting. "Elena," the nurse said softly, "you can stand beside him if you'd like." She hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was small, too intimate for the weight of what was happening. She stood near the wall at first, arms folded tightly, as if proximity itself might crack her open. Dante turned his head slightly. "You don't have to stand that far away," he said quietly. "I'm fine," she replied. He didn't push. He returned his gaze to the line of blood traveling from his arm into the collection bag. "Her heart rate is stable," the nurse offered, glancing at a monitor linked to the operating room. This is precautionary. Precautionary. The word felt fragile. A few minutes later, another nurse entered, carrying the labeled unit. Moretti, Dante. Matched. Confirmed. The bag was hung beside Sophia's bed inside the operating room. Through the glass, Elena watched as the line was connected. Red flowed. Slow at first, then steady. Dante's blood moving into Sophia's veins. Her knees nearly gave out. This wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't a question. It was circulation. A bridge between past and present that no document could sever. Dante leaned back slightly in the chair as the last of the required amount filled the unit. "Is she strong?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," the nurse replied. "Very." He nodded once, absorbing that. "She didn't cry when they wheeled her in," Elena said quietly before she could stop herself. He glanced at her. "That's not something children usually manage," he replied. She said she didn't want the doctors to think she was scared. His jaw tightened faintly. "She's not afraid of much," Elena added. A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "She gets that from you," she said softly. He shook his head once. "No. From me." The unspoken words hung between them. The transfusion line inside the operating room pulsed gently with each mechanical push. Dante watched it through the glass, as if memorizing the sight. "You were alone when she was born," he said after a moment. "Yes." "You held her first?" "Yes." "And you decided her life would not include me." She closed her eyes briefly. "I decided her life would not include your enemies." His gaze remained on Sophia. "Blood doesn't care about enemies," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." The nurse removed the needle from his arm, pressing gauze into place. "All set," she said softly. "We'll monitor both of you." "Both of you." Elena felt the words settle. Dante stood slowly. He didn't look drained, didn't look weakened. If anything, he looked more grounded. He stepped toward the observation window, standing beside her this time, close enough that she felt his presence in the space between breaths. Inside the operating room, the surgeon spoke calmly, movements precise. Sophia's vitals remained steady. "She'll be okay," Dante said. It wasn't blind optimism. It was certainty. "You can't guarantee that," Elena whispered. "No," he replied. "But I can guarantee she won't face it alone." She turned to look at him. The man who ruled half the city. The man she had run from. The man whose blood now flowed inside her daughter. He wasn't claiming anything. He wasn't gloating. He was simply standing there. Present. And for the first time she understood something that frightened her more than power ever had. This wasn't about biology. It wasn't about confirmation or pride. It was about connection. Undeniable. Visible. Alive. The past wasn't just resurfacing. It was circulating. And as Dante reached out instinctively, resting his palm against the glass that separated him from the operating room, Elena realized the truth with painful clarity. Blood didn't lie. It remembered, and it had just found its way home. It started with a phone that wasn't supposed to ring. One of the nurses at the central desk picked it up with a polite greeting, her expression neutral. Then it changed, just slightly. Not fear, not alarm, recognition. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Pediatric surgery is not open to visitors." A pause. Her eyes flicked down the hallway toward where Dante stood beside the observation window. "No," she repeated, firmer now. "That information isn't public." She hung up slowly. Across the corridor, one of Dante's men, who had been pretending to scroll through his phone, lifted his gaze. A single nod passed between him and the security officer stationed near the elevators. Elena felt the shift before she understood it. The air tightened. Not chaotic. Focused. She stepped closer to Dante. "What was that?" He didn't look away from the glass where Sophia lay under surgical lights. "Testing," he said quietly. Her stomach dropped. "Testing what?" "Whether I react emotionally," he replied. "Whether access can be pushed." As if summoned by the word access, one of the elevators at the far end of the corridor chimed. The doors opened to reveal two men in business attire. They stepped out casually, too casually. Their eyes scanned the hallway once before settling on the security presence. They weren't doctors, they weren't family. They didn't carry flowers or coffee. They carried curiosity. The security officer intercepted them before they reached the surgery wing. "Restricted area," he said calmly. "We're here to visit a friend," one of the men replied smoothly. "Name?" They hesitated. It was brief, but it was enough. "Not happening," the officer said. They smiled thinly and turned back toward the elevator without argument. Elena's pulse pounded. "That's not coincidence," she whispered. "No," Dante agreed. His voice hadn't changed. If anything, it had grown colder. "Word travels fast," she said. "It always does," he replied. The phone at the nurse's station rang again. This time the nurse didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the security officer first. He gave a subtle shake of his head. She let it ring out. Elena felt her fears from years ago rise like ghosts in the fluorescent light. "I told you," she said quietly. "I told you this would happen." He finally turned to look at her fully. "You told me they would use her," he corrected. "This isn't that." "It's the beginning," she shot back. Dante's expression didn't crack. "They won't touch her here," he said. "You can't promise that." "I don't make promises I can't keep." His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, then typed a short response. No dramatic calls, no raised voice, just instructions. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Closing doors," he replied. Downstairs, security doubled within minutes. The front entrance was quietly restricted to emergency traffic only. 2 more men in dark suits took positions near the stairwell exits. The hospital didn't panic. It adapted. Inside the operating room, nothing changed. Surgeons worked steadily. Sophia's vitals remained stable. But outside those doors, the city had taken note. Dante Moretti had a daughter, and daughters were leverage. Elena watched as another unfamiliar man attempted to enter through the side corridor near imaging. This one didn't even make it past the first checkpoint before being redirected. Her hands trembled. "They're not even subtle," she whispered. "They don't need to be," Dante said. "They want me to see them." "Why?" "To measure how much I care." Her breath caught. "And you're showing them," she said. He met her gaze. "I'm showing them I don't lose control." That was the difference. Elena had expected rage. A hospital lockdown. Men dragged out. Instead, Dante remained exactly where he was. Beside the glass. Visible. Still. His response wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Another buzz of his phone. He answered this time, voice low. "Yes." A pause. No escalation. Another pause. "Document faces. Track vehicles. Quietly." He ended the call. "You're not going after them?" Elena asked. "Not here," he replied. The simplicity of that terrified her. "You always retaliate," she said. "Not when it proves their point." He looked back toward Sophia's small form beneath the lights. "They want chaos," he continued. "They want headlines." "And what do you want?" she asked. His voice dropped. "I want them to understand that testing a hospital is a mistake. Without noise, without spectacle, just inevitability." One of his men approached quietly. "Vehicles identified," he murmured. "Plates traced. They're connected to Rinaldi's outer circle." Dante's eyes darkened for a fraction of a second. "Noted," he said. That was it. No visible fury. No immediate retaliation. just a mental ledger being updated. Elena felt it then, the terrifying clarity. She had been right to fear his world, but she had underestimated him. "They're not going to stop," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but neither am I." Inside the operating room, a nurse adjusted Sophia's IV. Red flowed steadily. Outside, rivals circled like sharks scenting blood. But Dante didn't thrash. He didn't roar. He stood still, precise, measured. And Elena realized something she hadn't fully understood until now. Weakness wasn't that he had a daughter. Weakness would have been losing control because of it. And as security tightened invisibly around them, as rivals were quietly documented instead of confronted, she saw the difference between the man she had feared and the father standing beside her now. Enemies smelled vulnerability. What they got instead was calculation. And calculation was far more dangerous. The first sound Sophia made wasn't a cry. It was a small, confused exhale. Elena was on her feet instantly. The recovery room was dimmer than the surgical wing. Lights softened to protect waking eyes. Machines beeped in steady, reassuring rhythms. A nurse stood near the monitor, adjusting settings as Sophia's lashes fluttered. "She's coming around," the nurse said gently. Elena moved to the bedside, fingers trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mama's right here." Sophia's eyes opened slowly. Dark, clear, searching. For a moment they looked unfocused. Then they found Elena's face. "Mama," she murmured, her voice thick with anesthesia. Relief hit Elena so hard her knees nearly buckled. "Yes, baby, I'm here." Sophia shifted slightly, wincing. The nurse adjusted her pillow and checked the IV line. "You did so well," Elena whispered. "The doctors fixed everything." Sophia blinked again, her gaze drifting past Elena's shoulder, and stopping. Dante hadn't stepped forward immediately when they brought Sophia into recovery. He had stayed near the window, giving space, as if afraid proximity might feel like intrusion. But now Sophia was looking directly at him. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply held her gaze. There was no intimidation in his posture, no looming presence. He had removed his jacket, sleeves still rolled neatly at his forearms, the small white bandage visible where he'd donated blood. He looked less like the most powerful man in the city, and more like a man who had been waiting. Sophia's brow furrowed slightly as she studied him. Not scared. Curious. Children didn't carry history. They didn't weigh reputation against instinct. They reacted to what they felt in the moment. Elena held her breath. Sophia's fingers twitched against the blanket. "Who's that?" she asked softly. Elena's heart pounded. Dante stepped closer, but slowly, measured, careful not to crowd the bed. "My name is Dante," he said gently. His voice was different than Elena had ever heard it before. Lower, softer, not sharpened by command or negotiation. Just simple. Sophia watched him for a long moment. "You were here before," she said. "Yes." "You didn't look scared." A faint breath left him, almost a laugh, but not quite. "I wasn't," he replied. Sophia seemed to consider that. Her gaze dropped briefly to his hands. "They're big," she murmured. "They are," he agreed. She lifted her own hand weakly from the blanket, holding it up as if comparing. Small fingers, slightly curled from fatigue. He didn't reach for her. He waited. The nurse glanced at Elena with a quiet nod, then stepped back to give them space. Sophia squinted slightly, studying his face more closely now. Her eyes traced his jawline, the angle of his cheekbones, the shape of his brow. Elena felt the air thin. "You look like me," Sophia said. The words landed softly, but they echoed. Dante didn't flinch. He didn't look at Elena for confirmation. He looked at Sophia. "I was thinking the same thing," he said quietly. Sophia's lips curved faintly, the smallest hint of a smile tugging through the haze of medication. She shifted her hand again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She reached toward him. Elena's breath caught. Dante moved closer, slowly enough that the IV lines didn't pull. He bent slightly at the waist, lowering himself to her level. Her fingers wrapped around one of his. Not tight, just enough. Testing. Warm skin against warm skin. No fear, no recoil, just connection. Dante's entire body stilled, not frozen, reverent, as if something fragile and priceless had just been placed in his hands. "You're warm," Sophia murmured sleepily. "So are you," he replied. She yawned faintly, eyelids growing heavy again. "Did you stay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "For me?" "Yes." The word didn't shake. It didn't break. It held. Sophia nodded once, satisfied. "Okay," she whispered, as if that settled everything. As if the world could be trusted again. Her grip loosened slightly as sleep pulled her under once more, but her fingers never fully released his. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. This wasn't the confrontation she had feared for 6 years. There was no accusation, no confusion. Just a child waking from surgery and recognizing something familiar in a stranger's face. Dante remained bent beside the bed long after her breathing deepened into sleep again. He didn't speak. He didn't look triumphant. He looked changed, as if something inside him had shifted into place without permission. Elena stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't scare easily," she said. "I can see that," he replied softly. Sophia's hand still rested around his finger, trusting, unquestioning. And in that quiet hospital room, beneath the steady rhythm of recovery monitors, Elena realized something with quiet certainty. Fear had never belonged to the child. It had belonged to the adults. Sophia wasn't afraid. She had simply looked at him, recognized herself, and reached out. And Dante, who commanded men with a glance, stood there humbled by the smallest hand in the room. Morning light spilled through the narrow hospital window in pale gold lines, softening the sharp edges of machines and metal rails. Sophia was sleeping again, color returning slowly to her cheeks. The worst had passed. The surgeon had spoken in calm, reassuring tones. The complication was controlled. The transfusion had stabilized her. She was safe. For now. Elena stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the city wake up below. Traffic moved in steady streams. People walked sidewalks unaware that entire futures had shifted behind one hospital door. Behind her, Dante sat in a chair beside Sophia's bed. He hadn't left. Not when the rivals tested the perimeter. Not when the calls came in. Not even when one of his men leaned in to murmur something about handling Rinaldi quietly. He had simply nodded and stayed seated. Present. Visible. It was that visibility that frightened her most. He didn't have to announce anything for the city to understand. The hospital already knew. Security already knew. The foundation board would know before noon. Dante Moretti had a daughter, and he had bled for her. That kind of information didn't stay contained. "Elena." His voice was low, careful not to wake Sophia. She turned slowly. He looked different in daylight, less shadowed. The hard lines of his face softened slightly by fatigue, by something heavier than control. "We need to talk," he said. She nodded. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophia monitored and sleeping peacefully. The corridor no longer felt tense. Security was still doubled, but it had settled into quiet watchfulness instead of alert tension. Word had spread. Not through headlines, through networks. "You have 2 options," Dante said calmly once they were alone. Her chest tightened. "I don't like ultimatums." "It's not an ultimatum," he replied. It's reality. He leaned lightly against the wall, hands relaxed. You can leave again, he said. Change cities, change names. I won't stop you. Her breath caught. You wouldn't? His gaze held hers. I would track you, he said honestly, but I wouldn't drag you back. The truth in that stung. And the other option? She asked. He didn't hesitate. You stand beside me. Not behind. Not beneath. Beside. You let the world know she's mine, he continued. You let them see that she isn't hidden. Not erased. Not vulnerable. And that makes her safer? She asked. Yes. He stepped closer, not imposing, but certain. Secrecy invites predators, he said. Visibility invites consequence. She remembered those words from the Foundation documents, from the strategy behind his empire. Public protection. Accountable power. You're asking me to put her in the light, she whispered. I'm asking you to stop carrying this alone, he corrected. Her throat tightened. For 6 years you've made every decision by yourself, he continued. You've been mother and shield and ghost. She swallowed hard. You don't have to be a ghost anymore. The word hit deep. She looked down the hallway toward Sophia's room. Her daughter had woken without fear. Had taken Dante's hand as if instinct recognized what paperwork denied. Sophia hadn't asked for secrecy. She had asked, Did you stay? Yes. For me? Yes. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Running had been survival once. It had been love shaped like escape. But escape required constant vigilance. Constant shrinking. A childhood built on aliases and moving boxes and looking over shoulders. She opened her eyes. If I stand beside you, she said carefully, it's not your world she steps into. He didn't flinch. It becomes ours! The correction was immediate. She goes to school, Elena continued. She has friends. She has a normal life. She keeps it, he said. No armed convoys at playgrounds. Agreed. No bodyguards hovering at birthday parties. They won't hover. She narrowed her eyes. They'll blend. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. She exhaled slowly. And decisions about her are shared, she added. Yes. Not dictated. Yes. Not strategic. His gaze softened. She's not an asset, he said quietly. She's my daughter. The simplicity of that cracked something inside her. For years she had imagined this moment ending in dominance, in control, in power asserted. Instead, it stood here, waiting for her consent. She looked at him fully. You won't hide her, she said. No. You won't use her. Never. And if they come? His voice dropped, steady and absolute. They'll go through me. Not arrogance. Promise. Elena felt the weight of the decision settle into her bones. Run again. Erase again. Or let her daughter grow up knowing her father didn't hide, knowing her name didn't need to change to survive. She walked past him, back into Sophia's room. Dante followed, stopping near the foot of the bed. Sophia stirred slightly as Elena brushed her hair back. Mama? She murmured sleepily. I'm here, Elena whispered. Sophia's eyes flicked to Dante, still heavy with fatigue. You're still here too, she said softly. Yes, he replied. Sophia smiled faintly. Good. Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. That was the answer. Not strategy, not fear, not history. Good. She looked at Dante across the bed. I'm not disappearing again, she said quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. Then neither will I. Outside the hospital, the city moved under clear daylight. Inside, no one whispered the surname anymore. It had been spoken, confirmed, claimed. And this time, Elena didn't reach for an exit. She stepped into the light beside him, not erased, not hidden, known.